Hello, a warm and kindly welcome to this next episode in Series 2 of the My Kind of Leader podcast. Thanks for turning up, and just to kick off, I'm reminding you that if you're watching this on YouTube, then each slide has a QR code that takes you directly to my LinkedIn profile. And the reason I'm doing this is because there's lots of resources on there that are free, and there's a deeper explanation also about how I work with individuals and companies. So it's a very easy way of getting in touch with me. But on every slide also is my email, so feel free, any questions, any queries, and if you want to join into the conversation about kindness in leadership or otherwise, then just fire me an email by all means. So this episode of My Kind of Leader podcast was another one, much like the Bullish Boss episode, came from feedback from my book and also conversations I'd had with people where people were querying, does kindness belong in leadership? And if it does, is it not a concern that people will be overwhelmed by overgiving? So I thought, why not have a discussion about that very thing? Because, people do get mixed up with what actually kindness means, I think. So I thought I'd dig into it a little bit more today. So this is a bit of a deeper dive, but it really is about the information that's in my new book, My Kind of Life in Leadership. And that QR code on your YouTube is the code that goes straight to the book. If you want to read it, it's just a bit more than an hour. It's probably about an hour and 10 minutes read in all, but it's one that you can dip into. So if you want to know a little bit more broadly about the My Kind of Life methodology, by all means, grab yourself a copy. So let's carry on. Okay, so really what I mean by kindness in leadership is truthfully the absence of unkindness, I suppose, the absence of brutality. But if you dig into kindness a little bit deeper, then really what you're talking about is empathy. It's very, very hard for people to be empathic if they're not already empathic with themselves. And I'll go into that a little bit more later. So if you're empathic with self and therefore with others, what you actually have done is created a type of leadership that has intertwined with it kindness at its heart. So it's kind-hearted leadership, but that means it has good boundaries, i.e. it looks after the individual leader, manager, director, whatever you want to call that role. It has clear limits, kind-hearted limits, and it communicates those well. Gosh, that sounds dreadful saying it. They communicate it well. Okay, so what I'm talking about with kindness in leadership is really about empathy, how to see and feel into how somebody else might feel about what's happening, what they need to do, what you need them to do, how to communicate in a way that doesn't purposely hurt people's feelings. You can never, ever prevent mistakes happening, really. We can only try. And less mistakes in terms of brutal communication as opposed to kindly and empathic communication are made if the individual leader is already in companionable relationship with themselves. So why bother being empathic? I mean, some people wouldn't necessarily care about it. Maybe it seems a bit too fluffy. Maybe it seems one step too far when there's 1,000 other jobs on one's plate to do. But if you can't empathise with other people's points of view or emotional world at all, then you're going to struggle to include everybody, which truly means you're not going to get the most out of your direct reports or your team. You have to be able to see where they're coming from and see how they might be feeling. That doesn't mean to say you're going to get swamped in their emotional world. What it means is being able to understand enough about what they are going through, understand enough so that you can be informed of what they bring to the table and you include them fully. People know if they're not empathised with, they can feel it. So it's kind of one of those unsaid things, which I know makes it difficult for people to get. Why bother then if we can't really talk about it? It's felt. Many things in leadership are felt and not said. So it doesn't mean to say we'll not do something about them. Okay? So if you come across a leader or somebody that you're working with who feels like they haven't got time for people, or you feel like they haven't got time for you, really what's being communicated there without words is that person hasn't really practiced and become accustomed to giving themselves time. And more importantly, giving time to empathise and be companionable for what they're going through. It's impossible to fully empathise with somebody else if you can't already empathise with yourself. So again, there's that kind of dance of dynamic, dance of communication, dance as in being understood, being valued, being appreciated. It has to be between people. You can't assume somebody feels appreciated if you haven't shown them or if you don't feel it. And that's an interesting one, actually, because that comes up a lot in the one-to-one work that I do. It's always good if you really believe and appreciate somebody's efforts, work, who they are as people, even. It's great to say it. But truthfully, if the leader, manager, director, whoever you report to truly feels they appreciate you, you will feel it. So I'm not saying don't communicate it, but it has to come with that feeling from within first. And that's why it's tricky, right? It's tricky to talk about this because a lot of it is unsaid, but I'm still having a go. I'm still digging in. And actually lots of people are as well, which is why I've even started talking about this today, because people come back and go, oh yeah, I get this, or I don't get this. And that's great because we're talking about something that is tricky. So if I find that I'm working with somebody, or I hear of somebody that's really, really, really struggling to empathise with other people, 99% of the time it's because they're at their bandwidth, they're overwhelmed, they're about to burn out, or they've had to put their shutters down in order to survive spinning too many plates, spinning, or what do you call it, hats or whatever, juggling too many balls, juggling too many things. That's usually why people would struggle to empathise. Now, that's not just because they're full. It's because they're too full to empathise with their own position first. So that's why it's really, really important that we do stay within our bandwidth, because if you're already there and you're already full up, you're already overwhelmed, your neurological system has too much buzzing round it, the last thing that person's going to be able to do is say, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll take a few hours off, go to a relaxation course, or spend some time doing nothing very much so that I can empathise with myself. By the time somebody's got there, it's really difficult to pin that back. However, it's not impossible. So if you're struggling as a leader to care, not truthfully care, like deep down you care, but finding the time to care, finding the time to talk to that colleague or make that 15 minutes for that colleague to show that you do care what they're going through, is because you're already at your bandwidth, most likely. It's not that you're an unfeeling, unempathic person. It's just that you haven't got any resources left to share or give. So it's really, really, really important. So where I started, where people say to me, but if I'm kindly in my leadership, I'm going to get overwhelmed. You won't if you've already done it for yourself. It's not possible, because what you're doing along the way is adjusting and creating time to stay within your bandwidth. So there would be never anything like compassion fatigue, for instance. Compassion fatigue can't exist if you've already had compassion and companionability for yourself, where you've given time, made adjustments to resource yourself. You only get compassion fatigue, realistically, if you've nothing left in your bank, your barrel, your energy system. And along with that, I wanted to remind us all that empathy isn't where you feel it for the other person. It's where you feel it with them for a time. You don't feel it instead of them. You don't feel it for them. You feel it with them for a time. And that's what I meant about those kind-hearted boundaries, those kind-hearted limits. It might be you've got somebody in great distress, and truthfully, you really have got 10 minutes. But from a companionable place, from a compassionate place, you say to them, I'm so sorry I've only got the 10 minutes, but have it. I want you to have it. Come in. Let's talk about it. And then we'll catch up another time. So you feel it with them for the time that you've got, not filling filling yourself so that you're at your bandwidth and about to crash. So that's about communicating what you've got. And people appreciate that. People don't think you're being mean-spirited. What they do feel is that it feels mean-spirited if you give nothing because you're already full. So that's what I'm saying about that dance. It's a dance of energy. It's a dynamic. And, if people that I know, that I've worked with, cared about, or even people that I've loved, if they say that I can't give it, I go, that's fine. That's absolutely fine to me. But what you've communicated is that you care to say that if you've got nothing else. And that's really important to people. So you're never going to be swamped if you communicate what you can wish to give and what's available to them. So that communication is so much harder to do if you already are not able to internally have that dialogue with yourself. That's why self-awareness is so important. And then that step beyond self-awareness, which is companionability to self and allowing of all your emotional experience. And I don't mean at the boardroom table. I don't mean at the coffee machine all of the time. I don't mean that all emotion can come out wherever it feels like it's welling up, if you like. I'm not explaining that very well. What I'm saying is you've got to be available to all of your emotions at some point, and then they won't feel like they seep out into extraordinary or inconvenient places. And so the reason I've put this slide in, these slides are helpful to me because they're reminding me, why have I put this here? The reason I've done that is because a leader who is fully available to their own emotional world, and many are not, through no fault of their own, it's very tricky to become okay with all of your 10 main emotions. If you disallow it in yourself, your system has to disallow it in somebody else. And that's not to be mean-spirited, actually. What it means is your system cannot easily give that energy. It just can't do it. So if you see your mind and body as a system that has to preserve itself, if you haven't, for instance, allowed pride and anger or joy for yourself, you'll struggle to allow that for a colleague, even if you want to, right? If you just see it as energy flowing, it's really tricky for you as a system to allow that in somebody else, which is why it's really important to do emotional palette work on yourself as a leader. And that's not difficult work to do. It might be new to you, but it's not difficult. Become okay with all of your 10 emotions, and then you'll become more able to allow it in other people. That's what empathic leadership is. And of course, it's tricky if you can't do it for yourself. So I'm going back a little bit. This comes up a lot, that people in roles where they think, look, I do want to be a bit more kindly. I have been quite short with people, or short-tempered, or even bullish. But if I go the other way and put more kindness into my leadership, does that actually mean I'm going to get taken advantage of? Well, no, of course it doesn't. Because like I said before, it's kind-hearted boundaries, it's kind-hearted limits. It's you being aware of what your limits and boundaries are, so that you don't get beyond your bandwidth and be short-tempered. Or if you do feel like you're getting there, you'll communicate that and go, I'd love to be here and talk to you today. Can we speak in the morning? Or what you say is, like I said before, I've got 10 minutes and then I need to go. So you'll only be swamped by other people's needs if you've disallowed them in yourself, or you're at your bandwidth, if that makes sense, right? So this is what companionability to self really means. Compassion to self means you've allowed it in others, and therefore, sorry, I've got that completely mixed up. You've allowed it in yourself, and therefore you allow it in others with ease and without it using you up. And that's what I spend a lot of my one-to-one work doing, and my work with teams. How do I make this more easy for you, so that you don't get used up, you don't feel overwhelmed, and you don't get taken advantage of? Okay, you're feeling it with another person. Empathic leadership is feeling it with them for a time, and then you move through to what your next thing is. But that person feels appreciated, valued, seen, heard, and will feel a bit better for what you've given. And they, most importantly, won't feel alone. You're doing the best that you can do under difficult circumstances. So it works like that. I might have got these slightly upside down, these slides. So, but I think I did this I gave these examples so that you knew I'm not talking about anything too flowery here. I get where you're coming from. And if you really mean it, people feel it. And you can only mean it if you've done it for yourself first. Okay? So for instance, like, I wouldn't have imagined how hard this was going to be for me. That's somebody in dialogue with themselves going, I can't have imagined that I was going to go through this. What is it that I now need to do in order to get myself through this and feel better? If a leader has already done that for themselves, empathy for somebody else in a difficult situation is much, much easier. Okay? Much, much easier. And this will come up again and again in this podcast and in the interviews. I do ask people, when have you been in a really difficult, challenging time, and how did you get yourself through this? And often people will bully themselves through a really tough time. And if they have a propensity to do that because they don't know what else to do, unfortunately, sometimes, not always, they may have bullish behaviour towards somebody else that's having a difficult time, or their shutters will come down to protect them because the emotion of another person is too difficult. You don't have to feel it the same, but you do have to be companionable to your own emotional world in order to allow that of another. Okay. So that is really what I really wanted to say in terms of the kindness in leadership and how that is intertwined with empathy, and looking a little bit more closely at empathy to self first gives you everything that you need to be empathic to somebody else, apart from becoming used to how do you reach out to somebody, how do you put that sentence together, if you like, how do you approach somebody, how do you show that person that you do care because you're concerned that you're going to make it worse, or that you're reaching out to them, being concerned for them might be construed as them being weak, or you might bungle it by mistake. Usually people don't mind that, by the way. They'd rather you make an effort to see how they are than not make the effort at all. Now, in terms of actual examples, there are more of these in my book, My Kind of Life in Leadership, which describes this methodology much better than I've done today. Okay, so by this QR code is, again, it takes you straight to Amazon, I believe. If you want to buy the book, it's $9.99 in paperback. I think it's half that price on Kindle. And by all means, email me with any questions, and my LinkedIn profile also has more free resources. So I hope that was helpful. I know I got myself into a bit of a pickle towards the end there, but it's because I'm trying to describe that whole dynamic, that to and fro, that dancing dynamic between the internal world of one, me, you, and the other person, and that's the reason it is a dynamic is because what's going on inside is felt by the other. And actually what I may well do is do a pod actually on clear reach out examples, things to say, and why I've chosen those ways of saying it, just to make that a little bit easy for you. So I hope that was useful. I know sometimes I'm creating questions as I'm going along, and I could do other pods on those, but do subscribe wherever you're listening. Drop us a message, and by all means join in the conversation. Each series now going forward, as this one, will have interviews with leaders from around the world. And if you've got something around kindness in leadership, or even brutality in leadership, something to say, your own experience, something you've been through, I'd love to have a chat with you and create some pods in the future. Thanks for listening.